Okay, so just to continue my Prime Minister series, I've got up to Prime Minister number 14, William Pitt the Younger. That's leading on from the first brief tenure of the Duke of Portland. Now, William Pitt the Younger is one of our best known Prime Ministers and is regularly ranked among our top Prime Ministers. So it's going to be simply impossible to include everything that is significant in one video. He's known as William Pitt the Younger for two reasons. Partly to distinguish him from his father, who himself was quite a prominent Prime Minister, William Pitt the Elder, sometimes known as the Earl of Chatham. As such, William Pitt the Younger is sometimes simply known as William Pitt, because his father, whilst in office, was known as Earl of Chatham. So William Pitt the Younger was son of William Pitt the Elder, who had been Prime Minister, if you recall, between 1768 and 1770. My apologies, between 1766 and 1770. He was the 9th Prime Minister. Pitt the Younger was the 14th Prime Minister. He has a number of records. He was by far the youngest Prime Minister, assuming the office at the incredibly young age of 24. This, of course, would be impossible today, but we have to remember this was a very different time. So I'm going to give a little bit of background about William Pitt, and then read directly from the Downing Street page, because there's simply too much on the Wikipedia page to quote. William Pitt the Younger was born in Hayes, Kent, which is now a part of Greater London, in 1759. And he was educated at... Actually, he first contested the University of Cambridge, but lost. Well, I'm looking at the Wikipedia page now. But anyway, I'm going to get straight into the 10 Downing Street site, because I think that's a good source. This is a quote from William Pitt. On the execution of Louis XVI of France. On every principle by which men of justice and honour are actuated, it is the foulest and most atrocious deed which the history of the world has yet occasion to attest. That shows Pitt's conservative credentials. Although he himself described himself in various ways. For example, in fact, the Wikipedia page simply says none when it talks about allegiance of party. He was part of the Tory party, but he preferred to not call himself that way. And he is highly ranked among Prime Ministers because he understood the new Britain, the changing Britain. Anyway, this is from the Downing Street page. William Pitt the Younger, the son of William Pitt the Elder, was almost born to be Prime Minister. Immersed in political life from a young age, Pitt is said to have expressed parliamentary ambitions even before the age of 7. He was educated at home due to his poor health, but later studied at Cambridge and graduated at the age of 17. He then went on to study law and was called to the bar in 1780. Pitt stood unsuccessfully for the parliamentary seat of Cambridge University in 1780, but the next year returned as an MP for Appleby in Cumbria at the age of 21. He later went on to represent Cambridge University. In the House of Commons he proved himself a talented speaker. He used his talent to join with Whig politician Charles Fox in calling for peace with the Americans. However, when Pitt later joined the opposition, Fox would become a fierce rival. The following year, Pitt became Chancellor of the Exchequer and leader of the House under Lord Shelburne, I should say. His acceptance was regarded as a betrayal by Fox, who had refused to serve in this government himself. Taking up office at the age of just 24 years and 205 days, Pitt was the youngest ever Prime Minister, which caused some public concern. A popular ditty commented that it was the sight to make all nations stand and stare, a kingdom trusted to a schoolboy's care. Pitt was also one of the longest in the role. Against every predictions, Pitt's ministry survived for 17 years. During his first year he suffered many defeats, but undeterred, and was increasingly fired by criticisms from his rival Fox. His popularity rose steadily, and he won a very large majority in a well-timed general election in 1784. During that year, Pitt set about reducing the national debt and combating smuggling. The India Act of 1784 established dual control of the East India Company and centralised British rule in India by reducing the power of the governors of Bombay and Madras and increasing that of the Governor-General. The session of 1785 proved more difficult, as Pitt launched a reform bill that would rationalise dozens of rotten borough constituencies. This important bill was rejected, as was a Union with Ireland bill. A further difficulty arose when King George III's mental illness led Pitt's opponents to advocate that sovereignty should pass to the Prince of Wales. However, the King recovered in 1789, just after the Regency Bill had been passed in the House of Commons. In the early 1790s, the development of the Revolution in France caused Pitt to worry about its effects in Britain. He reacted by expelling the French ambassador and was blamed by Fox for the war with France that began in 1793. War also led to increased taxes and duties at a time when basic foods were scarce. Pitt was forced to introduce Great Britain's first ever income tax. The new tax helped offset losses in indirect tax revenue, which had been caused by decline in trade. There were problems with Ireland too. In 1798, Irish nationalists attempted a rebellion, believing that the French would also help them overthrow the monarchy. In 1800, Pitt's Act of Union with Ireland sought to resolve the conflicts there and grant Catholics equality. Great Britain and Ireland were formally united into a single realm, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, on the 1st of January 1801. In the same year, however, Pitt's attempt to abolish restrictions on Roman Catholics, who formed a majority in Ireland, proved unsuccessful. King George III refused to accept Pitt's Emancipation of Catholics Bill, saying that his assent would break his coronation oath of loyalty to the Church of England. Pitt resigned, having lost the confidence of the King, and Addington became Prime Minister. 3 years later, King George III asked Pitt to form a second government when Napoleon was threatening invasion. He accepted despite his failing health, possible alcoholism, and limited support in the House of Commons. He formed an alliance with Russia, Austria, and Sweden against France. After victory at the Battle of Trafalgar, he was hailed as the saviour of Europe. However, Napoleon went on to defeat Russia and Austria in 1805 at Ulm and Austerlitz, effectively conquering Europe. It was a profound personal blow for Pitt. He died at the age of 46 on the 23rd of January 1806. His last words were reputedly, "Oh my country, how I love my country." I saw a number of other things about Pitt. So, as we see there, he served 2 terms from 1783 to 1801, and again from 1804 to 1806. This makes him the second longest serving Prime Minister, and the longest since the United Kingdom was formed. His political party is described as Tory, but like I say, he personally described himself as somewhat unaffiliated. He died at Putney Heath in London. Major acts was the India Act of 1784 and the Act of Union in 1800. And he fought a duel on the 27th of May 1798 on Putney Heath against George Tierney, a Foxite MP. Pitt wrote to his mother, "The business concluded without anything unpleasant to any party," which suggests neither man was injured. It's incredible that the Prime Minister fought a duel. It's not as well documented as the Cannon Castlereagh duel in the later Portland administration, but nevertheless that is interesting. Now, one interesting lecture I would recommend if you want to know a bit more about Pitt the Younger is that given by the former Conservative leader William Hague, who himself became a politician at a relatively young age and was touted as a rising star of the Conservative Party at the age of just 16. I guess William Hague certainly had some influence from William Pitt the Younger. He wrote a book on Pitt, and I would love to read that book, even though I'm not a Tory. One of the things that is often credited to Pitt is that he avoided the chaos that was seen in France. So Britain could well have went in that direction, and it was very real fear. Of course, his critics would say that he went in the way of progressive reform, for example, Thomas Paine's sort of doctrine. So Pitt's certainly an interesting character. Not only was he the youngest Prime Minister, but he was also one of the youngest to die. I don't believe he was the youngest to die. I believe that the Duke of Devonshire was 44 when he passed away, so that would make him a little bit younger. But nevertheless, he suffered from illness throughout much of his life. As he is one of our better known Prime Ministers, he has been portrayed a number of times. He was in a brief sketch in the comedy Blackadder the Third, where he's portrayed as a boy. And there was a film made about him in the, I believe, in the 40s or 50s, simply called The Younger Mr. Pitt, and he's been portrayed in a number of other films. Interestingly, throughout his life, and I got this from the William Hague lecture, he never travelled much beyond the south of England, so he never travelled abroad, possibly due to his health, which is incredible for someone of his sort of fame. His integrity in industry and his role as defender of the threatened nation. Bear in mind, this was a very tumultuous time. It was a time of the French Revolution, the French Revolutionary Wars, the Napoleonic Wars. This was a very tumultuous time. William Wilberforce said of him, "For personal purity, disinterestedness, and love of this country, I have never known his equal." Historian Charles Petrie concludes that he was one of the greatest prime ministers, if on no other ground than he enabled the country to pass from the old order to the new order without any violent upheaval. And that is true. If you look at the Britain before 1783 and the Britain after 1806, it was a very tumultuous period. We were thinking about the Industrial Revolution was really picking up pace. Of course, Napoleonic Wars. Many significant things happened in his tenure. Try to think of some other things I can say about Pitt. Needless to say, many things named after him. Many streets in Glasgow and Windsor, Ontario, and Kingston, Ontario. Chatham County, North Carolina, was named for his father. However, Pittsburgh, North Carolina, was named for Pitt the Younger. Pitt Body in Tasmania. Pitt Street, which is the central business district of Sydney, Australia. The University Pitt Club, which is a club for male students at the University of Cambridge, which was set up in his memory. Yes, that biopic I mentioned was Young Mr. Pitt, 1942. The Madness of King George, he also had a role in that film. Amazing Grace, Benedict Cumberbatch played the role of Pitt. So there's a lot of portrayals of Pitt, which is not surprising. So that is William Pitt the Younger, who is regularly ranked as one of our top prime ministers, and certainly one of our most interesting as a case study.